Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now. Devastating surge across the country this morning. An alarming resurgence of COVID with new cases doubling in just the last 3 weeks, fueled by the rapidly spreading Delta variant. Hospitals in some states now at a breaking point. How health officials are now dealing with this meteoric rise. Pitch meeting. President Biden is now rallying support for his sweeping two-part infrastructure plan after meeting with Senate Democrats on the Hill yesterday. But can he seal the deal without Republican support? We'll bring you reaction from the GOP on this latest spending package. A little extra help, a monthly child tax credit, part of President Biden's $2 trillion COVID relief package, begins paying out to some American families today. We'll tell you what you need to know as back-to-school season kicks off. And looking up, while the viral spread of the Delta variant is still very much a cause for concern, a new survey shows Americans are positively thriving in their post-pandemic lives. A closer look at the resurgence of positivity back by popular demand. Isn't that the truth?
Yeah, no, like people.
Yeah.
Yay.
Fun, restaurants, concerts. I know, it's great. But actually, it is a really interesting story because we've talked so much about the mental health impact of the last year.
Exactly, yeah. So anything it takes to give people some positivity.
Yes, yeah, we'll get to that later in the show, but we start with the Delta variant, and it's now fueling a summer spike in coronavirus cases and, more importantly, hospitalizations.
Yeah, the more contagious strain is now making up nearly 60% of new cases nationwide, with more unvaccinated people showing up at hospitals. Speaking of vaccinations, they are lagging, down 54% from just last week. Experts are warning without high vaccination numbers, the Delta variant is here to stay.
The Delta variant is going to move its way through the country over the course of August and September, maybe into October. Unfortunately, the worst is yet to come. It's going to get worse before it gets better in terms of the spread of this infection right now.
NBC News health and medical reporter Erica Edwards joins us now. So, Erica, hospitals, especially in the South, are dealing with an increase in patients. What's the latest there?
Hey, Joe, good morning. You're going to see surges anywhere you have low levels of vaccination. Hospitalizations in Mississippi, for example, have doubled since July 4th. That state has one of the lowest vaccination rates in the country at just about 33%. Also worrisome there, the state's health officer said that 7 children are in the ICU with COVID-19. 2 of those children are on ventilators. Now, cases are also surging in places like Arkansas. It has a vaccination rate of just about 35%. In neighboring Missouri, cases are also surging. Their vaccination rate is at less than 40%. Health officials and nurses there are urging people who still have questions about the vaccine to talk with their doctors.
If you're able to get vaccinated, ask the questions that you have to a legitimate source so that you can be fully educated.
I have not taken care of a fully vaccinated patient that's been on a ventilator.
Now, overall, 59% of adults here in the U.S. have been fully vaccinated. Joe, back to you.
So, Erica, I know you have some new reporting this morning on how the vaccines could prevent people from becoming COVID long haulers. Those are people who deal with the effects weeks, even months after first getting sick. What did you learn?
Yeah, so we know the vaccinations can help reduce the risk of becoming severely ill, getting into the hospital, or even dying from COVID-19. That means even if you're infected after you're fully vaccinated, your illness is much more likely to be mild. But increasingly, I'm hearing from doctors nationwide that they are just not seeing cases of long COVID pop up following vaccination. Now, this is all anecdotal so far, but there is some preliminary data backing it up. Researchers at Washington University in St. Louis have been scouring databases, comparing millions of cases. And so far, their research is suggesting that the risk for becoming a long hauler following vaccination is very low. Now, there was one caveat I want to bring up. It could be that it's just too soon to recognize these cases because we really just started rolling out the vaccines a few months ago. Joe?
And Erica, I have to ask you about my beat this week, the Olivia Rodrigo beat, the Gen Z pop star. She was at the White House yesterday as part of a push to boost vaccinations, especially for younger people. What can you tell us about her visit?
Yeah, that's right. The singer-songwriter was at the White House yesterday to record some videos encouraging young people to get the shots. Those videos will later be released on her social media channels. Joe, I know that you follow all of those. Now, while she was there, she stopped briefly to talk with reporters. Here she is.
I am beyond honored and humbled to be here today to help spread the message about the importance of youth vaccination. I'm in awe of the work President Biden and Dr. Fauci have done and was happy to help lend my support to this important initiative.
Joe, teens and young people across the U.S. have some of the lowest vaccination rates in the country. Back to you.
Yeah, and I'm not the only follower. More than 28 million followers she has, so quite a reach there. Erica, thanks so much.
President Biden is pushing forward with Senate Democrats' $3.5 trillion infrastructure plan, meeting with that group on Capitol Hill yesterday to talk about how to move forward. Democrats are hoping to use the budget process to avoid a filibuster, as we've seen before, and therefore pass it without needing bipartisan support. President Biden and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer seem confident about the bill on their way into that meeting.
This is my homecoming. We're going to get this done. We are getting this done.
NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli joins us now. Mike, they say they are getting it done, but these meetings, these negotiations have been going on for months, even with Republicans, of course, for a period of time. So explain where we're at right now. What are the two paths that the Senate is pursuing, and what's in this $3.5 trillion version of a plan?
Well, Savannah, certainly this was a big step forward for the White House as they move on this dual track strategy. You still have, though it's important to note, no final legislative text has been written for either one of these two major proposals, but we know the broad contours of it. You have roughly $579 billion in that bipartisan package on traditional infrastructure, roads, bridges, expanding broadband access, as well as replacing water pipelines across the country. That $3.5 trillion, likely Democrats alone package has much more significant Democratic priorities, like expanding Medicare benefits to include dental and vision benefits. You have other significant climate provisions, which have been a big priority. Now, the priority here, of course, for the White House is making sure both of these run on time, because remember, he said he needs to sign both at the same time.
Absolutely. And now, Mike, we also know that President Biden had this meeting with governors and mayors at the White House. Of course, the types of officials that would be quite impacted by an infrastructure plan. And this came up. What do you say about it?
Yeah, this was a meeting yesterday which shows you the dual strategies that the president is pursuing, meeting behind closed doors with Democrats on a piece of legislation that is going to only pass with Democrat support, but then meeting with a group of Republicans and Democrats to push this bipartisan package. But it was during that meeting where he talked about his meeting with the Senate Democrats. Take a listen.
I went up and spoke to the Democratic caucus today, and we put together a plan that dealt with infrastructure. And it's a bipartisan plan. I think we're in good shape. There may be some slight adjustments of the pay for it, and that's going to get down to what the Congress wants to do. I've laid out how I think we pay for it, and we have an agreement. We have an agreement. There may be slight changes. I'm not sure what may happen, exactly how, but it's going to be paid for, and that's what we're going to do.
And today, the president is going to be speaking about a temporary benefit that he hopes to make at least a little bit more permanent, that expansion of the child tax credit later today.
Now, Mike, all right, the big question here, though, is how do any of these plans, any of these different paths that the president is pursuing, really get the support that it needs? I mean, it's unlikely to get any Republican support, but there are members of his own party that have been wild cards. Does the president have the full support of the Democrats? You know, there's a few specifically that I'm asking about.
That's right. Well, we heard yesterday from the leading progressives in the party, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, really expressing their strong support for this. What we have heard as robustly is Joe Manchin, is Kyrsten Sinema, those moderates in the caucus. But remember, when the president passed that $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill in March, we were waiting up until the last second to know how they were going to vote. I expect the same will probably happen with this one as well, Savannah.
All right, Mike Memoli, as always, thank you for your reporting. Good to have you.
Texas Democrats are still making the rounds on Capitol Hill after fleeing their state to stall the passage of a restrictive voting rights bill. NBCNews.com senior reporter Jane Tim joins us with the latest on the drama here. So, Jane, the legislators met with Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren and Georgia Senator Raphael Warnock yesterday. What did they talk about?
Joe, they're laser focused on voting rights and voting rights federal legislation. They know that the minute they go back home to Texas, that bill gets passed, the one they oppose. And they also know that redistricting data drops August 16th, and that starts a whole nother battle. So they know that federal legislation is the only way they're going to accomplish their goals. But let's listen a little bit to what Senator Warren had to say about the conversation.
I want to thank them for coming here to remind us in a very personal way how hard people are fighting across this nation to protect access to the vote. Those Texas legislators are here because they understand voting is the beating heart of our democracy. And the Republicans in Texas and Republicans across this country believe that the only way they can hang on to power is by keeping American citizens from voting. That's not how a democracy works, and it's up to us to fight back.
Making it human is absolutely the goal. That's why they're going to be here and be here for weeks.
Yeah, these lawmakers have a highly anticipated meeting today with who else? Senator Joe Manchin, who doesn't want to get rid of the filibuster, making it very hard to pass any of these federal laws on voting rights. What can you tell us about how these Texas Democrats are planning to approach that conversation?
Absolutely. Now, as we remember, this is not their first conversation with the senator's office. They met with him several weeks ago, his office. They couldn't get a meeting with him the first time. But this is a delicate dance. They want to make it very personal. They want to show what they see as their plight, the struggles that they face back home, to make this personal, as Senator Warren said. But it's going to be careful, because what they want is a carve out. Basically, the idea that filibuster rules don't apply to voting legislation like this. But Senator Manchin has shown absolutely no interest in that. So they're going to have to make the case for him to really flip-flop on a dearly held position that the senator has.
I also want to ask you about another election story. This one's in Arizona, a new House Oversight Committee investigation. They're going to look into that controversial Republican-led audit of the 2020 election results in Arizona. Remind us, who's conducting that audit, and what is this committee going to try to figure out?
Yeah, so this is going to blow up this whole big audit, but this is the Arizona Maricopa County audit, where third-party contractors were hired by state Senate Republicans to look at those ballots. Now, we've been talking about conspiracy theories that were just ran wild throughout this audit. Bamboo in the ballot, Trump campaign, UV watermarks on some of the ballots that proved fraud. Really controversial stuff, but a lot of secrecy. House Oversight Committee has subpoena power. I can't wait to find out what documents they get released.
It'll be interesting, and you'll have to Google bamboo in the ballots if you don't know what that is. All right, yes. Jane, thank you so much.
All right, wildfires in the West have burned through more than 1 million acres of land. The fires are being fueled by relentless heat waves, as we've been telling you about, in the most severe drought seen in years. NBC News correspondent Jake Ward has more.
Good morning, Savannah. Good morning, Joe. You know, here in the West, we've gotten used to the idea that fire season is getting worse, but this season is especially terrible, driven by a combination of conditions and fundamentally caused by climate change. Dozens of wildfires raging out of control in the West.
Gosh, we've had, 3 or 4 fires around here in the last month, and it's kind of getting scary.
2 million people under red flag warnings across 5 states: California, Idaho, Montana, Washington, and Oregon. The Bootleg Fire is the first official mega fire of 2021. It's burned more than 200,000 acres, doubling in size for 4 straight days, now nearly 7 times the size of San Francisco. And drought conditions in 94% of the West are making it all worse.
It has never been this low. It really, truly is unprecedented.
Lake Mead, only a third full, is lower than it's been since the 1930s. It's one of several depleted reservoirs across the Southwest.
Climate change has a very strong fingerprint on exactly what we're seeing right now at Lake Mead.
This weekend, authorities plan to close this boat ramp on the Nevada side of Lake Tahoe, citing low water levels and danger to boaters. Without enough water in lakes and reservoirs, vegetation dries out and becomes ready fuel.
It's like a stocked fireplace, tinder packed, ready to go up.
Symptoms of climate change fueling the fires. This fire season is about 6 weeks ahead of schedule. Outbreaks behaving like they typically would in August or even September. Now, these individually would be bad enough. We're talking here about drought, triple-digit, record-breaking temperatures, and extraordinarily dry vegetation. But the fact that they are all converging together to create these terrible fire conditions means this could be a very tough summer. Savannah, Joe?
Yeah, I have a feeling that will be the case. Jake Ward, thank you so much.
With that, let's get a check on your morning news now, weather out west and around the country.
Bill, we said it yesterday, but you've had quite the intro to your segment each day because this news is just crazy and it's not letting up.
Yeah, just wait till I show you the video of the water rescues from the flash flooding in Arizona. But first, we'll talk about the fires, and I'll show you that incredible pictures. So here's the map that shows where all the current fires are right now. Oh, actually, here, we'll show it to you now. This was in Arizona from a flash flood. Oh, I'm going to go backwards. All right, so 65 active large fires out there across the country. We have more than 2 million acres that have burned already. We were showing you and talking about, we saw the amazing satellite picture from that Bootleg fire, just the plume of smoke in that story. That's just north of Klamath Falls. That's the one that's 200,000 acres. There's also the Beckworth Complex fire. Those are the two biggest fires burning in the country. That one is just to the northwest of Reno. And that's, again, another mega blaze. But this Bootleg fire is 7 times the size of San Francisco. And it's just very early for a fire this big in the season. It's only at 5% containment right now, too. And as far as today goes, red flag warnings are really what tells firefighters that if a fire forms, it could spread rapidly. And that's going to be the case today in areas of the interior Pacific Northwest. Now let me show you that video. So we've had flash flooding in the last 2 to 3 days in areas of Arizona. And this was in Catalina, Arizona yesterday. This dad was in his car with his 2 daughters and got stranded in this flash flood. If you notice, the firefighter closest to the vehicle has one of the daughters in the white there in his arms. The dad's on top of the roof with his other daughter. He does safely hand his youngest daughter to the firefighters, and they do slowly walk to shore. When they were in this vehicle, it washed down the road 25 to 50 yards. So they're lucky it didn't flip over. That could have been a deadly and could have been a disaster. I'm sure Mom is very thankful for those firefighters and that rescue there. So yeah, again, we could see some isolated flash flooding in areas of Arizona today, but it won't be as bad as it was yesterday. But it's that time of year where we get those isolated pop-up storms there in Arizona. But yeah, pretty breathtaking. Imagine being that mom and hearing that story and seeing those pictures.
Yeah. At least they were able to get to the roof, too, to give them a little bit of, make it a little easier to rescue them, too.
Yeah, imagine that. A dad pulling your kids up on top of the roof. Yeah, kudos for him for having a cool head and doing that.
Yeah. That rescue is worth the wait and the back and forth. The video, the map, the video, the map. Yeah. Thanks, Bill. See you soon.
Britney Spears is celebrating after a victory in court. A judge granted her the right to hire her own lawyer. The decision came during Wednesday's conservatorship hearing, during which Spears offered more tearful testimony by phone. She demanded that the court remove her father, Jamie Spears, from the conservatorship and called for him to be charged with conservatorship abuse. Spears said every part of her life was controlled under the conservatorship and that, quote, their goal was to make me feel crazy, and I'm not. The judge granted her request to hire celebrity attorney Matthew Rosengard, who called on Jamie Spears to step down from the conservatorship. Through his attorney, Jamie Spears refused to step down, saying he loves his daughter and he only wants the best for her. After the hearing, the singer took to Instagram to thank her fans for their support, posting a video of her horseback riding and also doing cartwheels. Coming up, the Biden administration's Homeland Security chief is facing backlash from immigration rights advocates this morning.
His response to Haitians and Cubans fleeing their respective countries to come to the U.S., that's up next. The Biden administration is issuing a stern warning to Cubans and Haitians looking to flee from political unrest.
Any migrant intercepted at sea, regardless of their nationality, will not be permitted to enter the United States.
Immigrant rights advocates are criticizing that message from Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas and calling on the administration to rethink its position as the unrest unfolds in both Caribbean nations. For more on all this, I want to bring in NBC News correspondent Julia Ainsley. Julia, good morning. So first, just tell us a little bit more about what the Biden administration's message is here and why they plan to turn refugees from Cuba and Haiti away. Well, in a way, it's not new in the fact that for decades, we've really been seeing a lot of interdictions of people trying to come by boat. Think about Elian Gonzalez back in 2000, when the people that he came with were turned back and he was eventually taken back to Cuba. But they say the big reason is for safety, because it is so dangerous for immigrants to make that journey. And Mayorkas spoke to that on Tuesday. Here's what he had to say.
Migrants who do attempt to enter the United States by sea put their lives at incredible risk. The waters in the Straits of Florida and the Caribbean are dangerous, especially now as we have entered hurricane season. People will die.
So while it is true that we have entered hurricane season and it is more dangerous, it's not lost on anyone that Mayorkas himself came when his family fled Cuba in the 60s. He came here as a child to the United States, and you can see, he's risen to be now the Secretary of Homeland Security, but he's still sending this message. He did say that they want to find other ways for immigrants to come here, especially if they have family members in the United States. But for now, the message is not only will you be sent back, but even if you have a legitimate asylum claim, they plan to resettle those people in a third country. One more deterrent to tell these people who were fleeing unprecedented violence in their countries, which were already very violent or very poor, to tell them America is not where you need to be planning on coming right now.
Yeah, and Julia, you very smartly point out, of course, Mayorkas' own past, which is really kind of the driver here of this criticism, with people calling it shameful. Now, you also pointed out that this is not new in terms of the U.S. not wanting to accept people that are trying to come by boat. You mentioned the dangers. Mayorkas mentioned the dangers, but the U.S. does have a specific history of turning back Cuban and Haitian migrants. Remind us of some of those cases, but then also how this situation might be different.
So, right, you could think about Elian Gonzalez in 2000 that we spoke about. Also in the 1990s, there was a time where many Haitians were kept in Guantanamo Bay, especially those who were HIV positive. It's certainly a blight on America's immigration past, which is already pretty convoluted and not always rosy. And with this case now, what the immigrant advocates are saying is that even though it might be that there have been interdictions in the past, the fact that Mayorkas is doubling down on this message and upping the presence of the U.S. Coast Guard to keep those people from coming to the United States is the wrong message at the wrong time, that they need to be sending a message of compassion, which is what they say the Biden administration ran on in the first place.
All right, Julia Ainsley, stellar reporting as per usual. Thank you so much.
In Florida, protests over the situation in Cuba are raising questions about a tough new state law. Governor Ron DeSantis championed anti-riot legislation during last year's Black Lives Matter protests, but critics say the response has been inconsistent, even hypocritical. NBC News correspondent Kerry Sanders explains the controversy.
Joe in Savannah, there's growing fears among Cuban Americans here protesting in the streets of Miami's Little Havana that each day that goes by without a protest in Cuba is a sign that the momentum could be vanishing. The streets of Havana are quiet after clashes with Cuban authorities. While in Miami, demonstrators are out again. Protesters here have shut down major highways, one blocked for more than 6 hours on Tuesday. Traffic also brought to standstills in Tampa and Orlando. Florida's new anti-riot law, established in response to Black Lives Matter protests, targets road blockades like those seen this week, signed into law by Republican Governor Ron DeSantis in April.
I think this bill that I'll sign into law shows the state of Florida takes public safety very seriously.
The law says in part, a person may not willfully obstruct the free, convenient, and normal use of a public street, highway, or road. And if they do, they're subject to felony arrest. Yet critics ask if legislators felt the law was needed to prevent road closures like those during Black Lives Matter protests, why was no one arrested under that law when roads were cut off during this week's Cuba protests? Police from 2 Florida departments tell NBC News there were several arrests, but the anti-riot law was not used. They say that's a matter of officer discretion.
it completely contradicts what they said when they passed this law, that it wasn't about Black Lives Matter, but it was a public safety issue. And now we look at what's going on in Miami, where they're shutting down major interstates, but yet there's no enforcement of the law. It's hypocrisy 101.
And what does it tell you about why the law was passed to begin with?
This law was always targeted to chill the First Amendment rights of Black people in the state of Florida.
Governor DeSantis' office, in a statement to NBC News, says under pre-existing Florida law, blocking or obstructing a roadway without a proper permit has long been illegal. Cuban-American leaders here are encouraging protesters to stay off highways, hoping that the protesters show that they're simply supporting Cubans on the island, an island that's only 90 miles from Florida. Joe, Savannah?
All right, Carrie, thanks so much. Time to take a look at what's making news around the world this morning.
NBC's Matt Bodner joins us today from Moscow. Hey, Matt, good morning.
Savannah, good morning. Well, let's start things off in Haiti, where authorities are continuing their investigation into last week's shocking assassination of the Haitian president. Now they are looking for several suspects, and these include a former senator, a fired government official, and a convicted cocaine smuggler. Meanwhile, actually yesterday, the head of security at the presidential residence was taken into police custody for questioning, and he actually remains in custody. So this shocking story still ongoing. Moving on over to Israel now, the United Arab Emirates has opened an embassy in Tel Aviv. It is now the first Gulf state to open an embassy in Israel, and they've opened it actually in the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange building, and they're kind of talking up all kinds of trade and investment opportunities. And this, of course, comes after the two countries normalized relations last year, and Israel actually opened their first embassy in UAE last month. Finishing now in Brazil, where President Bolsonaro was admitted to a hospital in Brasilia yesterday after suffering from uncontrollable, unstopping hiccups for the past 10 days. Now, his office yesterday said that he was feeling fine, but since then he has actually been moved to another hospital in Sao Paulo for some assessments, and they're trying to decide now whether or not he needs to have some kind of emergency surgery to clear an intestinal block. So that's what we have for you.
Hey, I can't stand 10 minutes of hiccups.
I
so
know.
10 days.
It sounds like a nightmare.
Yeah.
Oof. Man, everybody around you is kind of like, what's going on?
I have a trick that does work, but it's very strange. But if you ever get hiccups, come to me.
Should you share?
No, it's very complicated.
Okay, well, we're going to get that out of him one day.
All right. Thank you, Matt. A new report from the Justice Department's top watchdog is blasting the FBI for its handling of former gymnastics doctor Larry Nassar. The DOJ's Inspector General says the Bureau dragged its feet looking into sexual abuse allegations against him, and that put even more girls in harm's way. NBC News correspondent Stephanie Gosk has the troubling findings. Steph, good morning.
Good morning, Joe. Well, the Inspector General says that the FBI first learned about Larry Nassar in July 2015, but it took nearly a year for them to open an investigation. During that time, Nassar kept his job as a doctor at Michigan State, and now his accusers are saying that the abuse could have been stopped earlier.
The scathing report outlines a string of failures by the FBI in the earliest stages of the Larry Nassar case, including at first not handling the allegations with the utmost seriousness and urgency that they deserved. In July 2015, USA Gymnastics first told the FBI field office in Indianapolis that multiple gymnasts had made sexual abuse allegations, and that Nassar had lost his job as the Olympics team doctor. But according to the Inspector General, the field office conducted limited follow-up, only doing one phone interview and not properly reviewing evidence in the case. The mother of gymnast Maggie Nichols told Savannah how frustrated she was when an agent finally reached out after months had gone by.
I reported this over a year ago, and you're the first person from any form of law enforcement that has called me. And I said, so when did you get this assignment? He told me yesterday.
While the investigation lagged, Nassar kept his job as a doctor at Michigan State University and at a top gymnastics club, allegedly continuing to abuse minors in his care. In a statement, the FBI calls the conduct and facts in the report appalling, and that the actions and inactions of Bureau employees described are inexcusable and a discredit to the organization. The agency adding it's already taking steps to improve and ensure that failures don't happen again. The 57-year-old Nasser is serving a life sentence for sexual abuse and possession of child pornography. In all, hundreds of women and girls have accused him of sexual abuse, including Olympic stars Ali Raismond and Simone Biles, who recently opened up about how Nasser's abuse affected her in her Facebook Watch docuseries, Simone versus Herself.
I was super depressed. And I didn't want to leave my room, and I didn't want to go anywhere, and I kind of just shut everybody out. And I don't know, it was really hard for me. I was like,
Biles and Raismond have been calling for accountability for years, and now the Inspector General says the FBI should have done a better job. It's calling on the agency to make some changes, among them clearly stating when their employees should reach out to state and local officials if there's been an allegation of a crime against a child, and how the victims of those crimes should be interviewed and when. Guys, back to you.
All right, Stephanie Goss, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Coming up, a child tax credit from the Biden administration is hitting some American families' bank accounts today.
Our own Stephanie Rule helps break down how much money you could see next. Meghan Markle is developing a new animated series for Netflix. It's called Pearl. The show will be about a 12-year-old girl who's inspired by a variety of influential women from history. It'll be the first animated series from the Duke and Duchess of Sussex's company, Archwell. She'll be executive producer alongside David Furnish, that's Elton John's husband. No release date has been announced yet. Just add that to the long list of projects for the Duke and Duchess of Sussex.
Oh my gosh, they are busy. And, we've all kind of been wondering what was going to come out of the Netflix thing, so that's pretty cool.
There's another project for them. All right, moving on. Longtime activist and prominent professor Cornel West has quit Harvard University, sharing what he calls a candid resignation letter. He posted the letter on social media. In it, West accuses the school of, quote, intellectual and spiritual bankruptcy. West says he had been denied tenure and paid less than he was 15 years ago. He wrote, "The shadow of Jim Crow was cast in its new glittering form, expressed in the language of superficial diversity."
His letter came a week after prominent journalist Nicole Hannah-Jones said she would not join the University of North Carolina faculty after her prolonged tenure dispute. Let's bring in NBC News national reporter Janelle Griffith for more. Janelle, good morning. Thanks for being here. So what did West say were the reasons for his resignation? Obviously, Joe just read a little bit of what he wrote, but tell us more about this. And then also, what have we heard, if anything, from Harvard?
Yeah, so he has accused Harvard of basically prioritizing its public image and putting its public image and donors above the faculty and the students. And as it relates to him specifically, he said that the university does not value him and that they have disrespected him and that he felt like he had enough and therefore he's resigning. Harvard has not spoken out publicly. I reached out to them for comment for my story and they declined to comment. So we don't know what their position is. They have not responded to any of his claims.
Quit nearly 20 years ago. Remind us, why was that, and what did he have to say about how he was treated when he returned in 2017?
So he did quit in 2002, and at that time he said that the reason why he quit was because he had a public spat with the president at the time, Warren Summers. He returned recently in the last few years, and he said that he was denied tenure, but he had hoped that he would eventually be granted tenure. And the significance of tenure is that it provides essentially job security. It's a distinction given to professors, which prevents schools from being able to fire you without cause. And he said that he suspects the reason why Harvard may have denied him tenure or rebuffed his request for tenure is either his age or potentially because he has expressed public support for the Palestinian cause.
Do we know what's next for him? What's next for Cornel West?
He's actually returning to the Union Theological Seminary in New York City, where he was hired at 23 years old. And he has said that he believes that they will be more welcoming to someone of his caliber and who wants to teach the teachings that he has.
All right, Janelle Griffith, thanks so much for your reporting. Appreciate it. Americans looking forward to traveling abroad this summer should prepare themselves for some confusing, inconsistent, and potentially expensive COVID testing rules. Here's what NBC's Tom Costello with more on what you need to know.
For Americans finally taking off for foreign skies, confusing and inconsistent rules. Some countries do want to see those CDC vaccination cards or a European equivalent. Others don't. Regardless of vaccine status, dozens of countries require a negative COVID test from a U.S. pharmacy, clinic, or airport test site before passengers ever leave the U.S.
Have you ever been hospitalized for COVID? No.
At Dulles Airport in Washington, temperature checks and nasal swabs for passengers of all ages. The price varies depending on how quickly you want the results. $75 for 2 to 3 day results, up to $250 for results the same day. For a family of 4, that can run $1,000.
Definitely worth it. I live in Egypt, so I need to go back to see my family, my kids, my wife.
Yeah, but it's not cheap.
It's not, no.
If you're American heading over to Europe right now, France, Italy, Greece, Germany are some of the easiest to get into, where you just show your proof of vaccine. But all of this is changing by the minute.
Regardless of where you travel, everyone returning to the U.S. must have a negative COVID test to even board a plane.
It was easy. It was fast. The results came on my phone via WhatsApp, and everybody accepted it on WhatsApp on my phone coming through.
U.S. Airlines constantly updating their mobile apps as countries constantly change their requirements, allowing passengers to upload their test results. United partnering with Abbott Labs and selling a $25 instant self-test kit so passengers can test themselves overseas on a video call with technicians, then board that return flight.
It prevents them from having to seek out a test in an international country that they may not be familiar with, and is just a really helpful part of the process to help them travel.
Not all countries accept the same COVID test results, so know what the country you're traveling to requires before you spend hundreds of dollars on a COVID test. I'm Tom Costello at Dulles Airport. Back to you.
All right, thank you, Tom.
This morning, direct deposits are on the way for tens of millions of families as the enhanced child tax credit goes into effect. It comes as consumer prices continue to rise and parents prepare to send kids back to school in person. NBC News senior business correspondent Stephanie Rule is here to answer all your burning questions on this very important topic. Good morning, Stephanie. Always great to have you. So, Steph, I mentioned that this is a credit that's been enhanced. So what's new here for families who qualify? What do they need to know?
Well, first things first, for any child, any dependent ages 6 and under, you'll be getting $300 a month. It's $250 a month from kids ages 6 to 18. And you keep hearing this term, it's fully refundable, meaning this is now going to come in monthly payments, either by check or direct deposit. One of the issues previously is that we get this child tax credit as one lump sum when we do our taxes as a refund. But guess what? For the poorest Americans out there who don't make enough money to file their taxes, but who are clearly the most needy, if you don't file your taxes, you never get the credit. This resolves that. And many believe, experts believe, this could cut child poverty in half because now this money is going to reach the neediest households in America. Unfortunately, for those who will be receiving it, it is going to expire at the end of the year because it's part of the American Rescue Plan. And while the president would like to make this permanent as part of his human infrastructure plan, thus far, it's only 6 months.
Now, Steph, I'm sure there are a lot of people at home who've got kids, period, at home, anybody under the age of 18. So tell us who is eligible for this, and then what do they need to do? You mentioned it'll come in the form of checks or direct deposits. Is this just going to show up for people, or is there action they need to take?
If you already filed your taxes last year, you will get that money. If you filed direct deposit, you're going to get it even quicker. If you didn't, go to childtaxcredit.gov to find out more information if you're eligible, because the more money you make, this phases out. You'll be ineligible, but you're just going to have to fill out a few basic forms. And even those forms, if you do direct deposit, you'll get that money sooner.
And Steph, how much is all this going to cost? What's this program look like?
It is going to cost $100 billion a year. And you could say, like, holy cow, Steph, that's a big price tag. I'd like you to know what childhood poverty costs us. Almost $1 trillion every year. So doing nothing costs us almost $1 trillion. $100 billion, one could argue, is chump change when you think about the overall cost and then the overall impact, hugely positive.
That has me saying, holy cow, Steph. Steph, always great to see you. Thanks so much.
Coming up, IKEA is under the microscope this morning.
Yeah, the furniture giant's alleged ties to illegal logging in Russia. We've got that story next.
Time now for a CNBC Money Minute, the biggest financial headlines of the day and why they matter to you.
CNBC's Bertha Coombs is with us this morning. Hi, Bertha. Good to see you.
Hey, good to see you guys. We start off with a warning. U.S. safety regulators are urging more than 50,000 owners of Chevy Bolt vehicles recalled for fire risks last year. They're asking them to park those cars outside and away from their homes after charging them. General Motors also emphasizing the same recommendations, adding that the vehicles should not be left charging overnight. GM is investigating reports of 2 recent fires in Chevy Bolts that were recalled last November. GM thought that it had solved the problem. The vehicles in question are from 2017 to 2019 model years. Meantime, Walmart adding the Justice Tween brand to stores and Walmart.com just in time for back to school shopping. Justice is geared towards girls aged 6 to 12, closed its more than 800 stores as part of the bankruptcy filing of its parent company, Ascena Retail. USA Today reports that Walmart is going to sell more than 140 products from the line, including clothes, jewelry, accessories, bedding, backpacks, stationery, tech accessories. I don't know what else there is. Walmart basically has started to sort of test that line last spring, and they said that most of the products that they put on sold out in just a few days. And Joan Savannah, if you're starting to think about what to get for the holidays, gifts for that special someone, LG's rollable TV finally coming to the U.S. Price tag, $100,000. This is a thin 65-inch screen, comes with a sound system, and has Google Assistant and Amazon Alexa built in. For that money, I want it to come with George Clooney unrolling it for me every day in my own home. The wow factor is the ability to roll it up or down from the housing unit, so you can just sort of shy it away. And it's seen a little bit of inflation and went on sale in South Korea last year for $87,000. I guess, the really skinny chips must be making it more expensive here. $100,000 for a TV.
I just don't think it's worth it. I mean, that's nice, but not for like $100,000.
I guess the point is so you cannot need it, but then it's what? That's just like a
Yeah. Okay. Well,
took me a minute to even knew what you meant by it. Also,
you could buy 2 of those or fly to space.
Yeah,
so
exactly. Bertha, also, I feel like we just learned something about you there with your fantasy of who comes with it. I love it.
It's okay. My husband knows all about me and George Clooney, or at least, my feelings about George.
Very good.
I love it. So good to see you.
An investigation by the nonprofit environmental group Earthsite says IKEA likely sold children's furniture made from wood linked to illegal logging in Russia. In a report by the group called IKEA's House of Horrors, the world's biggest furniture retailer is accused of using pine wood likely to have come from companies in Siberia that repeatedly violated Russian environmental laws. NBC News global security reporter Dan DeLuce joins us now from Washington. So, Dan, walk us through some of the key findings of this group's investigation and what are the implications here?
Thanks. It's a really amazing report. The research is extensive. So not only the Russian courts found that this logging was illegal and damaging this really vital forest, but also it was found that a lot of other companies were probably using this wood. And it's really the tip of the iceberg. This is a forest that is basically the Earth's lungs. This is generating the air that we breathe and absorbing carbon dioxide. And this logging is really ruining this forest and creating more wildfires that are threatening our atmosphere.
So what has IKEA said in response to this, and what kind of impact might this have on the company?
Even the group that put out this report says that IKEA is actually one of the more environmentally conscious companies out there. but they have a huge appetite for wood to sell their furniture. And IKEA says it's no longer going to take wood from this particular logging operation owned by this Russian politician. And they're also saying that, though, that the wood they used, as far as they're concerned, was legally harvested. But again, I think the report's point is that it's really not about IKEA. It's about how many companies are not checking on the sources of their wood, and that the European Union and the U.S. need to enforce laws that ban importation of illegally obtained wood in these really crucial forests that are so important to the planet's climate.
All right. Interesting report. Dan DeLuce. Stan, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Coming up, even with the spread of the Delta variant on our minds, Americans are reportedly feeling pretty good about their quality of life.
Look out your window some days.
Yeah.
The latest Gallup survey on our post-pandemic lives. Next.
Americans are living their best lives, according to a new Gallup survey. Life satisfaction is exceeding pre-pandemic levels, and the good news is stress and anxiety are on the decline.
It's good news. NBC News Now correspondent Simone Boyce shows us why.
The United States is continuing to get shots into arms, shoppers into stores, restaurants are opening up, and coronavirus hospitalizations are low. Things are looking up, and as a nation, we actually seem to agree on that. A new survey by Gallup asked Americans to rate their current and future lives on a scale of 1 to 10, and they sorted folks into 3 groups: thriving, struggling, and suffering. Nearly 60% of folks surveyed in June evaluated their lives highly enough to be considered thriving. That's the highest percentage of thriving individuals the survey has had since it started measuring life satisfaction back in 2008. That also beats the previous high of 57% from September 2017. Now, during the initial coronavirus outbreak and economic shutdown, the percentage of thriving individuals plummeted to the study's lowest point of 46%, tying the low measured during the Great Recession.
We ask Americans monthly how they're doing, both in terms of their life in general, but also since COVID really took off, we've really been focused on how Americans are experiencing the pandemic economically, emotionally. So now we can look back and really have wonderful comparison points on basically all facets of life and how they've changed over time in the U.S. We also wanted to ask about boredom, and we always do. Half of Americans basically said they were bored at the height of the lockdown. That's down to 26%. So life evaluation and negative emotions are down. We also ask about how much daily enjoyment you experience, and that's recovered, but it's still not at the level we saw before the pandemic. And it's really interesting to see that metric come back with, particularly as economies get back on track and cities and localities open up again, and Americans are more able to really participate in social activities. And despite these really positive national numbers, there are communities in the United States right now that are experiencing high spikes and very, very severe economic and health impacts.
This June, 3.4% of respondents were classified as suffering. That's in line with pre-COVID estimates.
So it really depends on how things unfold. It wouldn't be surprising to see places where the economy essentially starts to drying up again because of lockdowns, that people's life evaluation would reflect that. At least that would be consistent with how people have evaluated their lives in the past 20 years in the United States.
As the research points out, Americans' life evaluation tends to fluctuate based on a number of different factors. But major events like elections or financial crises can offer some explanation for these national trends.
In this crisis, what was interesting is that even though Americans' own current life evaluation really declined, their hope for the future actually held on pretty steadily. And it was very different than what we saw during the financial crisis in 2007, 2008, where both current and future life evaluation really tanked. So if you could sort of describe how Americans weathered this storm, 2020, they really kept hope for the future. They were hurting at the time when the lockdowns were at their height, but right now they've really made a rebound.
Of course, with new coronavirus variants comes some uncertainty as to whether this trend will continue.
Very cool.
Very cool. Good news.
Yeah, it is good news.
Good news
It's kind
about
of
good
like
news.
surprising, but I think so much of us are experiencing so much gratitude for things that before we didn't necessarily, we didn't feel that way about. We took it for granted.
And not to be a downer, but I'm curious how long it lasts.
Yeah,
That'll be, I think, we keep an eye on.
A realist here.
And with that does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
Stick with us. We'll get more positive as the news continues right now.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.